Welcome, welcome. Yeah. I love that gifts. So, hello everyone,
Testing.
welcome, and thank you so much, Mo, for joining us today. And I will give you this stage to you, so you can start. Jewish.
Hey, so hello people. Okay, I think I need to highlight my screen, so my screen will be the biggest here. And not because I'm too cocky or anything, or I'm too obnoxious and I want to be the biggest screen, but because the presentation is right there. So I need to showcase my presentation as I'm talking to you all. And hello, we will be talking about gamification as per usual. So to start off, our lovely host, Damla here, would send us a link in the chat or put it up. And I want you all to take a couple of minutes to go through this one. And once you're done, I'm going to ask you a question. So let's see what you will do about the link and let me know what you are going to be experiencing. So Damla, can you help me out?
Yes, sure. I'll share it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it's on the chat.
Okay, check out the chat, check the link, click on it, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to see what you could do about this one. It's fairly simple. And I'll be curious enough to know at the end, how long would it take you to finish it? Like in how many minutes? Okay. Wish I could see a screen of each and every person solving this to know what they're doing. Bear in mind, it's not only a cat, there's another animal afterwards. So, Damla, are you taking a try at it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, maybe it is not a good idea because I didn't have a chance to look at it.
It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay, for all those who are coming in, we sent a link in the chat. We want you all to take a knack at it, try to solve it. We're giving people a couple of minutes to see their reaction to it, what they will be experiencing. And if you may, do let me know you finish both puzzles in how many minutes. Put it up in the chat. Okay, 1 minute, 23 seconds. Okay. 1 minute, 9 seconds. We're finding many winners here. 1 minute, 37. It's a race. 1 minute 37, 1 minute 23. So far, Laika, you're the winner here, like 1 minute and 9 seconds. You're a titan in puzzles. 128. Okay. No cheating. Okay. 1 minute 12 seconds. So far, no one is getting the top score of 1 minute and 9 seconds. Can I give it one more minute to see what's going on? Not finding any more winners. Come on. Where's Stefano, the guy that started off with Star Wars? Need to see your record here. 2 minutes and 36 seconds. 2 minutes 30. Fair enough. Okay. Okay. I think so far, Leica, you're the one that won with us. But the point is, there's a question that I want you all to answer me, whether in the chat, open up the microphone, do let me know, that comes here. Was this an activity or a game or gamification? What do you reckon? And why? Curious to know the answer. This is going to be how we start off our subject. Is this an activity, game, or gamification? Many people are typing down activity because there was no engagement, characters, button, etc. Okay, fair enough. Activity because there is no learning objective. Here it's all about thinking. It's a memory game. Okay, it's both a game and gamification. We use the game as part of a gamification. Kirolos, I'm a bit confused by the answer, but I'm getting there. Okay, I think it's just an activity. There's no rules, no context, and so on. It was an activity. Every game includes activities. I like that one, Cecilia. Thank you. Game without learning objectives, just for ice breaking. Not even for ice breaking. Honestly speaking, I didn't even use this for ice breaking, to be completely honest with you. Just putting this up as an opener, actually, for my topic. Not actually an icebreaker. I would say activity, but also a game. The objective is to solve the problem. No game elements, no score, etc. So it's an activity. Okay. Okay. So let me try to explain what I'm doing here. Readiness activity. Fair enough. Okay. I've always had a problem with the word activity, honestly speaking, because people, when they consider the word activity, the first thing that comes to mind is an exercise or some sort of a practice or even something for ice breaking purposes. But the point of the matter is, most of what we do in learning solutions, call it synchronous or asynchronous, is circulated around the fact that it is an activity. A lecture in itself is an activity. Brainstorming is an activity. Doing a discussion is an activity. The fact is that activity stems from acting on something. It's activating the learner. It's activation. I'm trying to activate the learner into engaging with the content or with the subject matter. So anything that we do in a training session or anything that we do even asynchronously is considered activity. But is everything that we do a game? That's the case. And do games have to have points? Do they have to have leaderboards? Do they have to have badges? Do they have to have scores? Do they have to have buttons? Not specifically. See, there's a big difference between a couple of facets here. You have play, and you have game, and you have an activity. I would say that every game is an activity, but not every activity is a game. And let me try to break down the nuances here. Now, play is literally what you guys have been doing. You are just playing. No objective, no nothing, until I've said, please let me know who would finish this the fastest. Now it started to become an actual game. So a play is simply dabbling with something, messing with something with no quantifiable or measurable outcome to what you're doing. If I am simply throwing my glasses here, or I am playing with something in my hand aimlessly, this is a play, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a game, it needs to be within borders. It needs to have a system. So a game is where there's specific input coming in, an artificial conflict, and then that artificial conflict has to be governed by rules, and it has to have specific parameters to how we can put out manageable, controllable, measurable objectives. In our case, since we are instructional designers and we're people working in L&D, our measurable, controllable aspect is the learning objectives. Now, was this gamification? That's the thing. Now, gamification still applies the same principles of what a game is, which is systems and systems engineering. Because if anyone asks me, do you work in the field of gamification? I would say not really. I work in the field of systems engineering, because mainly everything that we do in learning and development is dependent on creating systems. Now, gamification is just another discipline or a genre or a strategy that we utilize our systems with. We put it as a layer to increase engagement and to get people into further more attainment towards the end milestone, which is the learning objective. And accordingly, Damla, I always have a problem with people that have never done instructional design ever in their life. And they will be like, you know what, I want to get into gamification. Well, let's get into applying some systems first, and then we can utilize gamification. So in our session, we'll talk about a couple of things that did happen during the activity that we were doing, the opener for my subject. One of the things was that you had to go look at the magnifying glass, and the magnifying glass kind of gave you more of an indicator on what to do and how to put the pieces together. We will use this in a little bit to make sure that you understand the difference between it and what gamification really needs. Like any game that you would pass through, whether it's a video game or a board game or an asynchronous learning game. So to start off, what is gamification? Gamification is the application of game mechanics in a non-game context to promote desired behaviors and to drive specific learning outcomes. Now, let's stop here for a moment and explain this carefully. Gamification is the application of game mechanics. People, when they think about game mechanics, the first thing that comes to mind is, movements on a board, or player elimination, like Uno, who finished the cards first, or maybe badges, or a leaderboard, or a pointing system. But this is the outer shell of what a mechanic is. Mechanics, the way I like to call them, are the steam engines. They're the provoking elements that you enlist and put within the game to make people act in a certain way. We're putting mechanics to let people go and follow a specific process that we have laid out for them in order for them to get certain behaviors out, for certain behaviors to manifest. So you can look at mechanics as behavioral steam engines that we put in a learning system. For example, we can look at maybe putting them into teams or putting them into only individual silos. That's a mechanic, and that's a totally different mechanic. That would foster certain type of cooperation in a game, and this would foster a totally different type of cooperation. Also, how are you going to let people fail? Because, as I said, in any game system, there has to be an artificial conflict. So if you make them fail too much, they will hate the game. And if you make them win all the time, well, it's like giving people participation trophy. You're all winners, which is basically nonsense in my own book. Because honestly speaking, when you look at nurseries and you look at schools with with young kids, they come all winners. I have a problem with this one. I need to know who won and who did not win. Call me a sadist, but this is how it works. Because if we're all winning, then We're all achieving the same thing. There's no difference. There's no loss aversion. There's no achievement. There's no recognition. I know you cannot do this with a 3-year-old, but you could do this with a 7-year-old and above, that they can know that they've managed to maintain a specific level of mastery. And that's the second aspect in games. Games need to give you an understanding of how you are leveling up in your knowledge acquisition or ability to manipulate a specific skill. If you cannot have a progression system where people are increasing in mastery level, then you're not really having a game. Imagine, for example, if anyone played Super Mario. Anyone here played Super Mario before? Super Mario. I'm going for something pretty basic. Who did Super Mario before in his life? Definitely. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So let's go into Super Mario. First level, number one, as we're going in. The game offers you the following. You're trying to see how the controllers are working. They're doing something here called scaffolding. They're onboarding you, like how in induction programs when you get into an organization. So you're starting to understand, okay, so I need to jump, I need to do this, and it gives you feedback. So in order for me to understand what is happening, the game needs to give me feedback. It needs to tell me what to do and what I should not do. It needs to tell me the borders and the parameters of my system. And then I jump on a specific brick, or I jump and hit a brick and I get a mushroom or I get coins, and accordingly, other reactions would happen. And afterwards, as it progresses in the game, I am maintaining a level of manipulation that gets harder and harder and more complex as I go forward. If the game kept on being static and stagnant as I go in, I'm going to be leaving the game. And true, by the end of each and every level, we go and we save Peaches, the princess, but every time it gets harder. And every time Peaches just runs away and I have to go and get her from a different castle. I understand. It's pretty hectic. It's pretty exhausting, but we still love the game because every time it's different. See, that's one of the things that you need to put into a gamification system is that you're putting game mechanics to promote desired behaviors that level up. And those behaviors are based on the learning objectives that you've put for the people, from simple to severe to more complex to more complex. And the more it gets challenging, the more it gets interesting as we go in, it creates a sense of flow. And flow, according to the book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, is that people have a means of equilibrium between how something is very challenging, but still I can manage to overcome that challenge. If it's too challenging, I'm going to be frustrated and anxious. And if it's too easy, I'm going to detest it and I'm going to let it go. And why do we do this? Because we want people to get to specific learning outcomes. And you know very well that learning is hard and not easy, and people really need to achieve it after time until they've managed to accumulate the necessary forms of accommodation and assimilation for a learning aspect to come to life. So that's why gamification as a system is used to drive the motivation and engagement of people or learners in a certain system, impacting the entirety of its components. On the contrary, we have game-based learning. Now, game-based learning, there's a minor difference between taking an entire program that could be a month, 3 months, a module that can stay for 7 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours, and making a small intervention. Game-based learning is basically letting people go through an experience, and that experience will teach you how to practice a specific skill or how to attain a specific piece of knowledge. Gamification doesn't have to teach you how to go through something, but game-based learning does. Because game-based learning is that going through the game, going through the experience is the teaching factor that lets people, by the end of it, know how to process GTD, getting things done, or how to do natural planning, or how to do SWOT analysis, because they went through an experience that taught them this. Gamification is putting a layer over an existing experience to make it move better and to get people more engaged on how to continue on from one step to the other. So gamification is not a learning method. Gamification at the beginning is not really a learning method. Gamification is a strategy that is used to make your learning experience far more engaging and far more effective. Maybe your program is stagnant, technical, has a lot of components in it. We'll talk about the use cases and what gamification is in a minute. Now, game-based learning is the process and practice of learning using games. The game itself teaches you from a learner's point of view, not from a teacher or an instructor or a facilitator's point of view. And here we're trying to increase learning's effectiveness, the aspect of learning itself, by practicing the skill to improve engagement. So it's an approach to learning. Okay. Now, game is system that we can utilize in game-based learning or in gamification, where in both cases, whether it's game-based learning or gamification, there will be players, there will be an artificial conflict, there will be rules, and there will be a quantifiable outcome. But the point is, and the difference between both of them, are you doing this to the entire system, or you're making a specific intervention to let people practice a skill and get outside of that experience, get outside of that intervention, able to utilize it and utilize it feasibly? Now, the best practices and the best use cases when it comes to gamification comes as follow. So let me put it for you on a grid here. This is from the learner standpoint, and this is from the designer standpoint. Okay. So here it's easy to use, complex to design, and simple to design. First off, onboarding. Very easy to use because it has to be counterintuitive. It has to be very simple for people to go through it. And it's very simple to design. You can do here not gamification, not game-based learning, but mainly gamification. You're trying to take the mundane induction or onboarding or orientation and maybe turn it into, and I know I'm going to be hurting myself saying this, my heart is going to ache. You can turn it into a monopoly. It aches because I hate saying the word monopoly, because when anyone just says board game, the first thing that comes to mind is monopoly. I just did this 2 weeks ago. I was doing a huge game on strategy and dealing with versatility and negotiation. And once I put it up, everyone was like, oh, so this is like Monopoly. It hurts. It hurts because not all board games are Monopoly. Monopoly is just very well known. But you can do a Monopoly for an onboarding. You can do a card game for onboarding, because here we're trying to turn the usual utility of what an onboarding is to something more engaging, more motivating to the people. And they're not going to come out of it attaining a skill, but rather we want them to be engaged and motivated to finish the onboarding session. Now, let's move on to something else. Compliance training. Now, compliance training, we want people by the end of this damla to be able to attain the knowledge and truly get into it and know what is right and what is wrong, because it is pretty severe. This can be complex to use from a learner standpoint because they need to go through a process, or they need to do maybe like phishing procedures, or they need to follow frameworks or policies that were set by the organization. It is very simple to design because you will be building this on the actual processes that the company created, but it will be complex to use from the learner standpoint because they will need to exert more cognitive abilities from their side to be able to get it right. Okay, so this is complex to use from a learner, but simple to use from a designer standpoint. Now, let's get into the stuff that becomes a little bit of a hurdle. Building learning cultures. Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. Building learning cultures are complex in its design and complex to use. Why is that? Simply because building learning cultures, you're trying to work on people's form of behavior. You're trying to let people practice something over and over, more than once, over and over, and get feedback on it, like in Super Mario, like in the simple activity that I gave to you, where you need to go back to the magnifying glass to check on it. This is when an activity can start to venture into becoming more of a game, because it's giving me feedback and it's letting me know what I should do or what I shouldn't do. And as a matter of fact, building learning cultures takes time, because behavior takes a lot of time for it to change. And you need to offer people autonomy. So it cannot happen every day. It needs to happen over different periods. You need to give them form of spaced repetition. See everything that I'm saying here? This is all systems. You need to understand the system of how people will be interacting with behaviors that you're presenting to them, in order for you to see how you can later on maintain for them to get that behavior more retained and more reinforced. I think someone has opened up the microphone and the TV is on. Okay. And that's when, with learning cultures, and by the way, I've been into situations where we did gamification systems for people, and that was for 2,000 employees, 2,400 employees. And we did that over storytelling, no points, only stories, and simple knowledge retention quizzes. And it happened in a duration of 3 months. And we had to allocate when they will be receiving the gamification component. We used to send them this either at time of commute as they're going back home, or at time of lunch, so they would have enough time for them to go through it. Also, it would give them enough feedback to let them know if they're doing this right or wrong. And we did that using videos and automated bots that would be sent to their phone. And we offered that on weekly basis 3 times every week. And every time they were so anxious to do what? To continue on the story. There were no points, only advertisement across the internal communication channel of the organization to know who was going through the game, what were their comments, what were the highlights in it. And those who managed to get high comments, we would give them badges. And we would reset each and every week new people interacting with the story. See here, I didn't do a leaderboard. I didn't use points, but I used the gamification system. So it's more about engaging the people onto something. Last but not least, which is easy to use but complex to design, is designing for cohorts and for campaigns. In a cohort, we can turn everyone here on Butter into maybe warriors or mages or ogres, come what may. And I can start to give you specific powers that you can use that can help you learn better. This is one of the times that I can use gamification in a very simple way. It will be very simple for the learner to understand, but what would be complex is trying to make sure that everyone is happy, and all the powers that we're putting for people are helping them in learning about the topic at hand, or about maintaining engagement with the cohort. So far, what I've been mentioning are what gamification is in a nutshell. But what I really want to focus on, the thing that drives gamification forward, are the steam engines. And this is when I can tell you about the very essential component in gamification, and that is the MDA framework. The MDA framework, which was done by Robin Hennick, Mark LeBlanc, and Robert Zubik, and please look it up, Google it, it's amazing. This is the holy Bible of what gamification system and game research is all about. It's called the MDA, Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. When we're doing any gamification system or even a game-based learning, we always go back to this. First thing to consider, what are the mechanics? Mechanics are the set of rules that dictate the outcome of the interactions within a game. Elements that move the actions forward. Things that I want people to do in order for them to give me asserted, specific, measurable behavior. Like jumping in Super Mario, and accordingly, they will be able to get a mushroom, or they will be able to get a coin, or move from one point to the other. And accordingly, mechanics are directly related to provoking the motivations of players to let them move forward. Okay, so if it got moved forward, what would happen afterwards? Well, it gets fostered, it gets manifested, it shows in dynamics. The mechanisms, the steam engines that we do are the common behaviors we put in the game, the type of actions that we want people to do. It's the rules that tells us specifically how to do everything in our game system. Dynamics are everything that happens in the gameplay, like putting the pieces of the tanagram together or acting on a specific processes. So I put up mechanics to let people get specific dynamics that I designed for it to happen. And all of this is enveloped within aesthetics. Aesthetics can be the story, can be the drama, can be the type of colors, user experience that you're putting for the entire thing. So you're letting people get into that immersive experience you want them to go through. Now, my most important aspect in this session or in this webinar is to let you know a couple of mechanics, core mechanics that you can use in any learning game. If you used those core mechanics, you're doing a learning game. Number one, victory condition. You have to set a victory condition, and we're putting it with the god of sun, the giver of light and life. And this is the Egyptian worship god Ra. And here, no game can be a game without putting a specific victory condition, a purpose that people can aspire towards. This is an extremely important mechanic that has to be in any game. True, it can be the learning objective, but people need to know that they're going to be winning something at the end of it. Second, learning games are based on logos. They're based on the philosophical concept of constructivism, that people are stitching pieces, they're building up something, they're following a framework, they're following a technique, they're following a couple of set rules, and upon which we're putting up the strategy of the game itself. So strategy, only by designing a game that requires people to plan and think several steps ahead, the mechanic of strategy can be considered a well-played mechanic in your system. If you have a game that doesn't have a strategy, you don't really have a game, and obviously you don't have a learning game, because the end in mind here is to let people follow a process or follow a specific procedure. Second, no learning game can ever work without having a progression system. Progression system, I always like to look at it as if it's like a skateboard. It's crucial for players to see where they can potentially go in a system, as to see where they came from. This mechanic can utilize other mechanics like points and badges and leaderboard, or boss battles like saving Princess Peaches every time. And it's a representation of how to program, or the modules or the lesson can qualify from one point to the other. It gives the learner an indication that they're leveling up or they're getting better. It's not just about getting new points. Hey, hooray, I got 100 extra points. What was the reason? That's not a feedback. If the feedback loop that you're putting the learner in doesn't give them an enhancement in their mastery or getting them closer to the purpose, then it's not a good form of feedback. And obviously, it doesn't work on their forms of progression in a learning system. The other thing, to make a progression system become better, you need to leave room for stingrays, for embedded assessments. As educators, we need to have a means of measurement in our design to enrich our learners' performance and indicate their cognitive recollection of the content that is being delivered. Embedded assessment do foster and encourage win some and learn some environment. You don't have to win everything, but as you go forward in that system with those forms of formative assessments that I've left inside, I'm giving you an indication that you're going forward correctly, or you're doing something right, or there's something that you need to tweak or take a little bit of a detour around. And no game on earth can be a game, call it learning or not, if people cannot feel a little bit of a threat. They need to know that they can fail. If they know there's no failure, they're not going to go into it. And that's when loss aversion. I love to represent it here by the Japanese god Fusion, the god of wind. It's a very terrifying Japanese god. Fusion here represents loss and defeat, as failure is extremely important to a well-designed game, allowing learners to change their mindset about how to progress in a game. And also, it builds up on their learning curve. It lets them do things even better or more accurately or faster, or maybe they need to give more focus into it. Because according to Terry Pierce and many other people that did talk about this aspect specifically, is that people in any learning setting away from games, they need to have and they need to face a margin of failure. Plus, you need to give them room to bounce back out of that failure. So this has to be part of your progression system. Second is curiosity. If I know how the entire game will be laid out in front of me, and I know how each and every level will be like, I'm not going to continue on with the game. So curiosity is a powerful storm, and it keeps people pretty much fueled inside of the system. If everything is explained to the learners, it will become very simple and mundane. You need to let a little bit of mystery be in the air, so you can encourage them to go into diverse ways and diverse directions. If you're doing the same form of assessments each and every time, they already have figured it out. But this time you're doing a different type of assessment, or you're giving them a different way to look at the aesthetics, or maybe you're taking them into a different route inside of the game or inside of the narrative or inside of the story. All of this builds up on their curiosity and gets them hooked in. And if that aspect of hooking in is working, then we are obviously using this mechanic correctly, which is the investment mechanic. As long as people are not invested time, effort, and money or emotions, they're not really inside of your system. The investment mechanic is utilized to let people appreciate and cultivate a behavior in a certain game design. For example, in the case where we did the huge campaign to those 2,000 something employees, they were so invested in the story. And by the way, I took that story out of the day-to-day activities of my learner persona who are in the organization. And every time they were trying to understand, okay, what will happen next? What's going to happen in that story? Exactly like how you're watching a Netflix series. It leaves you with a cliffhanger and you want to have more and more into it. The point is, they're going more into the story and also they're learning something on the way. The final core mechanic that I can leave you with here is social status. We all love to be winners. We all love to be victorious. Social status, and I'm representing it here by the god Poseidon, is so important in games. True, you might represent it with points, or badges, but it can also be represented in saying that that person is a winner for getting the best answer out, even without the points, or passing in the least amount of time. Poseidon is our mechanic of social status because it fuels greater visibility for people. It lets them get closer to their purpose. It lets them get closer to attaining better skill sets or more mastery. It feels good and it produces high sense of achievement. This one can work in coordinates with victory condition or with points, badges, and a leaderboard if you have points, badges, and a leaderboard in your system. Now, those core mechanics I've left for you in an e-learning because obviously in 30 minutes I cannot explain all of that. So I'm leaving you at the end here with an e-learning to let you know what are the core mechanics, how to use the different use cases, what is the best thing to utilize in a learning experience, and how to make a learning experience pretty effective. Plus, I left you with a couple of books to make sure that if you want to go back to references and resources, you can find it there. Given the fact that those mechanics can work with any other mechanics in tandem. So you can add, for example, you can add themes and narrative or not. You can put people into teams and guilds or not. You can make it a game that is built on competition, or you can make it a game that is built on collaboration. It really doesn't matter. The point of the matter is that you need to have a strategy that people can follow through, that is innate to the nature of the learning logos or logic that you're trying to teach them. It has to have a victory condition that is tied to the learning objective. There has to be embedded assessment, and within the embedded assessments, there is a margin of failure. Not everything in the system has to be laid out to them. There has to be a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of investment, and a little bit of mystery. And that makes them more engaged into trying to get further feed out of the game. And all of this is considered our progression system. And whenever there is a way for someone to get good feedback, good explanation that they're doing something good, do let them know. We love the flavor, the sense of achievement that can come in any game. So social status is extremely important, and it fuels our investment. So if you look at it, I don't work in gamification. I work in systems engineering. And each and every component that I just laid out here is a card that you can utilize, a card that you put, and each and every card is tied to a component in your system, and they're all reflecting on one another. Once you have those laid out and your existing learning experience is intact, ergo, you have a gamification system or a possible game-based learning that can teach people how to do a skill or acquire a specific piece of knowledge. So that was gamification in a nutshell. And I'm ready for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Thanks a lot, Mo, for explaining everything. So, Mo, by the way, someone asked, what is the matrix called?
The what?
Could you just look at the comments? Sheriff wrote
Previous
there.
said that getting into gamification before knowing the first thing about instructional design makes no sense. Yes, which I agree with. What source of knowledge do you recommend for someone who wants to start to advance in instructional design, Anna? Well, you need to study instructional design. That will be a lot of things, Kronos. That can be, I mean, there are many boot camps. There are many boot camps. There are many people that are working in the field of instructional design. But let's put it this way. You need to know the main frameworks in instructional design, like ADDIE, Dick and Carey, ropes, ARC. Also, you need to know how to put learning objectives using the ABCD framework by Robert Mager or Bloom's taxonomy to be able to get this going. Also, we can pass by action mapping in this one, and also one of the things that are extremely important for understanding gamification systems are educational theories. So one is behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism. Those are the three main theories. And there's another one, which is social learning by Albert Bandura. And lastly, the one that I do hammer on a lot for gamification specifically is called the self-determination theory, where you are putting in place the learner's form of autonomy, the learner's ability to gain more mastery, and the learner's ability to foresee a destined purpose. So if we have all of this intact and you can do it well, we can build up a gamification system, possibly feasibly. Any questions, guys?
Someone is typing.
Yep. There are, I mean, is there any resources for designing game boards? Okay, so it's not about designing a board game specifically safe. It's about how you put up the system for a game. And then it could be a board game, it could be a card game, it could be an escape game. But there isn't a resource that would tell you, okay, this is what you do for board games specifically. Because when we start to do a game-based learning intervention or an experience, we don't start by saying, I'm going to do a board game. We start by saying, okay, what would be the best thing that can let people go through VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity? I want to teach directors and managers on it. I start with the mechanics, or start with a real life scenario that they're going through, and then I'll be looking at the aesthetics. Okay, do I need to simulate this through a board game, or would it be a card game, or would it be something using technology, or would it be blended between both? We don't really start with board games, so you wouldn't find a lot of people doing board games specifically for learning as a resource, but you start with the system, and then later on the components come at a later stage. Does one have to use elements of game system that you mentioned for it to be a game? Well, more or less, any game needs to have a strategy to it. It's innate. It has to have a victory condition. Yukai Chao talked about it in his book, Actionable Behavior. Carl Cubb did talk about it as well. Many people, if there isn't a purpose, it satisfies. It dissatisfies the entire system, because I don't know what will be the end in mind here. And since it's a system, it has to have a progression, a form of progression to it, a progression system that can let me know how did I start and where am I ending. And since it's a progression system, you need to have a little bit of failure. And since it's a progression system, if everything in the system is laid out, it will be a problem. So you need to leave some mystery in it. Last but not least, if I'm going into a system and I don't know if I'm winning or not, like in Super Mario, for example, which is a very rudimentary example, I wouldn't really continue on the game because I'm clueless. I'm helpless. Am I winning? Am I not? I'm winning. Why am I winning? And if I'm not, why am I not winning? What's wrong here? So that's why I said those are considered the core mechanics. If you can put them in a game, it works. You can use them in pen and paper, and you can use them for a game that builds up on technology, or even in a game that is built using Unity or Unreal. Okay, fantastic breakdown of mechanics into Egyptian cards, by the way. Thank you for that. Thanks a lot. Very is the base mechanic of the gamification, but probably not everyone is going to reach the victory due to constraints such as time, budget, of paying for a subscription. How achievable should the victory condition according to the SMART system of measurable goals? And how can victory correlate with the final? The victory condition is the learning objective. So it's not about the subscription. And I actually didn't really mention any subscriptions here. But if, for example, a victory condition in, hold on. So here's a game that we have produced here. This game is called Blaze. So Blaze follows a very simple victory condition. That victory condition is that you finish the cards first before anyone else, the cards in your hand. So it's finishing the deck of cards that are in your hands. But in order for you to do this, you need to go through different actions, and you need to go through different role plays and figure out different situations also to avoid the Blaze card. If you got a Blaze card, you will go into a pledge, and that pledge would let you go through situations. And if you did not manage to get that situation right, you will get a strike. So if you got 5 strikes in the game, you're out. And if you finish last, you're a loser. But if you finish your cards first, obviously for a reason, and that's the victory condition. By the time they do that, we would be going through conflict resolution, the different facets of the conflict behavioral model, and they've went through different situations into conflict resolution from real life business processes. Plus they went through conflict with their team members and with the opposing teams that they're getting into a conflict with, plus going through actual conflicts that they meet in day-to-day activities. So that's why our game Blaze is a game that is dependent on one single victory condition: finish the cards in your hand if you can. So yeah, that's the victory condition. And by the time they do that, I've already satisfied my learning objective. Do you have examples from your experience where you combine gamification with other learning methods to provide diverse learning solution based on objectives? Yeah. I do have a game that spans for 3 days straight. It's a game, it's a learning program that teaches people about recruitment and selection, understanding competencies, diversity, cognitive biases, different types of interviews, and then they need to do an actual competency based interview. This game goes for 18 hours straight. It's a big board that people have to go through. As a matter of fact, if you can give me a moment, I might be able to show it to you. I think I do have. Yep. So this game, we call it Le Mans, based on the actual race that happens in France, Le Mans. That's the game. And this is the board. And this board, we have it laid out in a physical setting. And that was before COVID. And after COVID, we started to do it on Miro. And people go through 3 days physically to finish the game. And if it's done in a blended format, this is how it looks like. We go through the game into 5 consecutive days, 3 synchronous live sessions, and 2 asynchronous offline modules. And there's a learning management system that they go back to, and they do self-studying in it. And then afterwards, they come to session and they do the application with the instructors. The game is run for 15 people, and each and every team of 5 has an instructor that is dedicated to them for them to go through the game. It's 3 hours per each synchronous session. We use one board game that they all work on during breakouts, and they start to put up a strategy for how they're going to be passing through the different milestones of the board represented in cars. We have Bentley, we have Ferrari, and we have Aston Martin. And what else? Yeah. And it takes up 3 teams into a complete learning journey. The game is dependent on points, no badges here. And it simulates the process of recruitment and selection, while also the process of getting the best fit for the job, because they're represented by characters that they need to nominate for an interview, which to choose and which to go for an interview, which form of assessments should I use with that person, what type of questions that I would be using. So the system is the same. Before pandemic, we used to do it physically with people. After the pandemic, we had to tweak the system, make it a lot shorter, and basically divide it into synchronous and asynchronous to divide the cognitive load, and let people only focus on the application during the Zoom sessions, and anything that is studying or like self-study can be done asynchronously either before or after session. So this is how we've managed to make a learning solution out of an existing system. But what helped is we had an existing system. So it was easy for us to move the parts. I hope that can satisfy as an answer.
Thank you so much, Mo. We don't have any other question. And thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. But before we finish, I want to ask you, what did you learn today and what do you want to explore further?
And please do pass by the e-learning that I left for you.
Yes, I think I shared,
Because
but
if you
I'll
want
just.
to look into resources, explanation of use cases, and all of the data that you can consider as a challenge in gamification, I've left for you what is the concept of autonomy and agency, what are the use cases, what are the obstacles that you might find, what are the core mechanics, when to use them, how to use them, and extra resources for you to look into. Because I know 30 minutes are not going to be enough, but at least this can be a base for you to start investigating and digging deeper into the subject.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We can end the session now. Thanks a lot for your inputs, questions, and see you next time.
Thank you so much, Damla. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a bunch. Have a good one. Ciao, ciao.
You too. Have a great one.
Thank you so much, Mo, for everything.
You're welcome.